Hello, and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and with me, as always, is my guest host, the real star of the show, Derek Cohen, our Chief of Research at TPPF. Derek, we're officially in the session. It's here. It's here. We waited long, 18, well, I guess we had special sessions, so we didn't wait 18 months, but we waited at least a year, and we're here now in special sessions. Are you tired yet? Are you already counting down the days to Sanity die?
Not. We haven't really had much action in terms of floor action. Obviously a lot very highly publicized action on the floor. But as far as these, hearings going into the next calendar day, but staying on the same legislative day, we haven't had any of those yet. But I'm sure they're coming fast and furious.
It's a lot of hurry up and wait here at the beginning of the biennium session. We always like to start the show with something fun on our hot takes of the week. And so because it's the start of session, I started looking around for some fun topics to talk about. Rumors are always a fun topic to talk about. So I wanted to ask you your favorite rumor or myth about the Texas Capitol.
Well, one thing and I have to mention, and because I use this for joke fodder quite frequently, if you look in the Senate rules, it actually rearticulates a part of the Constitution that says both the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor can actually order a member not of the chamber imprisoned for 48 hours. And so there's all this rumor that, is there some sort of secret prison in the Capitol? And actually, there are several places that could function as a secure facility.
So both
are museum, or one's an office right now, and there's a museum.
There's not an actual prison in the Senate? I thought there was. You've made that joke so many times that I've actually thought there was a prison.
That why I got all the way around the world then, huh? No, it's unfortunately not. And then the House rules are silent on that, but it does give the Speaker that power in the Constitution.
Now, I don't know if you saw the headlines in Georgia, but they might need a prison in the Georgia legislature. There were some blows were thrown and some people getting arrested.
Hey, look, if the Philadelphia Eagles can figure it out at Lincoln Stadium, I'm sure that we can figure out in the legislature how to have some sort of carceral facility there.
My favorite rumor, I didn't know this, but my favorite rumor is that that Texas doesn't actually own the land that the Capitol is on. Have you heard that rumor before?
I never heard that, no.
Yeah, so I looked it up, and not only is it not true, but it actually leads to another fun fact, which is that Texas has actually paid for that land 3 times. Once in 1839. Somebody showed up and said, "Hey, this is when they bought the land, or when they were looking to build the Capitol, they were looking around to see whose land it was, and somebody showed up with some sort of documentation. They said, "Oh, hey, I guess this is your land. We're going to pay for it." And then again in 1874, somebody showed up and said, "Actually, it was my land, and here's the deed that I have," and so we paid for it again in 1874. And then finally in 1926, they finally figured out the mystery. Stella McGregor and Katie Sturgis were paid $20,000 in 1926. After they were able to prove that their family had the legitimate claim to the land in 1926. So we've actually paid for that land 3 times. What does that tell you about Texas' history of fiscal responsibility?
It tells me that we didn't always have such great comptrollers.
Oh, that's a great segue. That's a fantastic segue. But before we get to that, my favorite part is our shameless plug. I usually plug our newsletters or some of our products, but now I'm going to plug the biggest event that we throw every single year is called the Texas Policy Summit. The Texas Policy Summit, it's 2.5 days, day and 3 days-ish of all your favorite public policy issues. We have the fantastic Comptroller Hegar has been a keynote at those events and been a participant as well. But we have, it's just a ton of different issues, healthcare and tax policy and education. We talk about it for 2.5 days. I think it's the largest gathering of conservatives outside of any kind of DC conference that they hold there. And it's February 19th through the 21st. Seats are still available. You can go to TexasPolicySummit.com, TexasPolicySummit.com if you would like to attend that. But we actually we live stream everything that we do. So all of the panels, all of the keynotes, all of the plenary sessions, everything except the happy hour basically is live streamed. Although we will probably get to that at some point as well. So TexasPolicySummit.com
streaming service.
Yeah, we'd love to have you be there. All right, let's get to why we're all here. We are super excited, very excited to have Comptroller Glenn Hegar with us today on the podcast. Glenn Hegar oversees the state's finances, ensuring fiscal responsibility and transparency. His office is responsible for managing state revenue, overseeing economic forecasting, and monitoring public spending. Elected in 2014 as our Comptroller, he brings extensive experience to the role, having also served in the Texas Senate. Under his leadership as the Comptroller, Texas has navigated challenges like the economic downturns, the COVID-19 pandemic, fluctuating oil prices, and maintaining a budget surplus and a AAA credit rating for the state of Texas. We will talk today about his work, his approach to managing Texas finances, and what's on the horizon for the state's economic future. Comptroller Hegar, thank you for joining The Right Idea.
Good to be with you this morning. See, I already learned something. I had no idea that we paid for the land at the Capitol 3 times. That is actually crazy. I can't believe that fact. That is insane. Yeah, it's kind of like somebody needed to do a little bit better title work way back when to make sure you paid for it 1 time, not 3 times.
Very true, and we will. I'll send you that story if you want to use that in your speeches as well. We have to maybe find out if even that's true, because I just found it on the internet. So
that story's too good to check.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's jump into just generally, before we get into the big headlines that you made earlier this week. Generally, what do you believe is the state of the Texas economy right now, and how is Texas doing economically?
Yeah, great question. One of the most important questions. If you look at the state of Texas today, let me go back real quick. Kind of when I started in this job 10 years ago, Texas was the 12th largest economy in the world. And I used to brag about that all the time. Pretty amazing that as a state, the 12 economic regions, when they're added together, is the 12th largest economy in the world. But I had to stop saying that because we moved to number 11. Then I had to stop saying 11 because we moved to 10. Then we moved to 9. And then now we are the 8th largest economy in the entire world. That is pretty amazing to think about, that in 10 short years, Texas has moved from the 12th to the 11th to 10th, 9th, 8th, and soon, probably within the next 2 years that are remaining on my current term, will probably be the 7th largest economy in the world. So every year, historically, we outpace the national average in economic growth. Every morning when you wake up, it's hard to think about this. Think about it for the next week. Every morning when you wake up, there's roughly about another 1,600 people that call Texas home every day. And so I make that point in my speeches that when you woke up this morning, there was 1,600 more people than there was yesterday morning. And so my point is, if you think about that within a given week, that is actually a large-sized town, and then sets me up to make the point that as long as we continue to invest in our infrastructure, our roads, our water, electric security, electric systems, all those things that you and I as the taxpayers expect, the Texas economy continues to improve and continue to move in the right direction. So the base foundation of the Texas economy is strong. Growth in the last year has not been as strong as it had been in the preceding years, but there's a variety of reasons. Higher inflation. We just came off a 40-year high inflation. While it's not increasing at that rate, it's still high. Whether it is interest rates are much higher. And so all of these things have kind of tampered economic growth. But with that being said, we think Texas will continue to outpace the economic average of the United States.
What is it about Texas that makes us so resilient to things like, the COVID pandemic, which was a national nightmare, and yet, within 12 months we were back to pre-COVID, growth and jobs. We're the first state to get back to pre-COVID employment. What is it about the Texas economy that makes us so strong, you think?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's the Texas attitude of can do. Willingness to roll up your sleeves, try to find a solution. You may not be able to kind of swallow the whole apple at one time, but you realize as long as you keep taking a step, solving one problem after another, and then trying to make sure that government just stays out of people's way. The fact is people want to go out, earn an income, make a better life for them and for future generations. Businesses want to create jobs. And as we know, government typically stands in people's way. And so continuing to be reminded of that attitude that lesser government is better government, more efficient government, trying to make sure that we keep expenditures low, taxes low, put money back into people's pockets. And I think that attitude that Texas has had for quite some time, and as long as we continue on that path, will continue to have economic growth. And you've seen state after state after state, when they diverge from what that success story is and the reason, then they begin to have that economic decline.
Well, sir, I really appreciate that. I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that another element of the Texas economy that adds to that resilience is probably the diversity of the various sectors that we had. I mean, everyone talks about how, from the latter half of the last century, we were very heavily leveraged in oil and gas and energy, right? And obviously, it's still a major section of our economy. But now we have tech. Now we have all sorts of building up of the service industries as well. We just have this absolute boom across all sectors. What are I guess more simply put, what are the primary economic drivers of the state, and where do we see a lot of growth? Percentage-wise, even if it's a low percentage, coming in. What's an emerging growth sector for the Texas economy?
Yeah, one of the things that I ask people pretty frequently in different speeches is, can you guess what is the number one industry contributing to the gross domestic product of the state of Texas? Typically, the answer comes to the oil and gas industry because there's a large history with the oil and gas industry here in the state of Texas, agriculture in different parts of the state. And obviously, those are real bases of the Texas economy. They're extremely important to the Texas economy. But really, the one that has grown over the course of the last decade, now is the number one contributor for GDP, is the financial sector. Whether that's banking, insurance, real estate, that area is the largest piece. Manufacturing is a significant piece of the state economy. It's number two in gross domestic product. We continue to build things. We continue to ship things out of the state of Texas. Texas exports more than 20% of all the product out of the entire United States, but we're only 10% of the U.S. economy. So we're very tied to the global economy. We build things, we export things, and that is an extremely important piece. But the key to any economic success is the small businesses, small mom and pop shops. They are the ones that are creativity, ingenuity, creativity of building different things and building jobs. And so they're really the basis, and the strong piece of any economy is typically the small businesses. And unfortunately, people tend to forget that. And that's why one more layer of government, one more burden of government really is the straw that breaks the camel's back for who? Especially the small businesses, which are the ones for the economic generators and the creativity.
And you made headlines this week. Let's get to the current events here. You made headlines this week by announcing the biennium review, or is it biennium review?
Biennial revenue estimate.
Revenue estimate. Yeah, sorry. The biennial revenue estimate, the BRE this week. And it was about 192 billion, rough estimates. That's not real numbers for people. One of the headlines was that it was a little bit lower than the last estimate that you had made. What do you think the reason for that was? And is this, some sort of cause for concern for the state of Texas?
Yeah, one of the biggest reasons for that, two factors, were two reasons. Number one, we had a very large historical, unprecedented, once in a lifetime, as I categorized it, a cash carryover balance from 2 years ago, the 2-year budget to this one. So that was number one. That was reduced from a variety of things. Legislature spent money on one-time expenses, whether it was water infrastructure, our park systems, university funding, broadband infrastructure, and property tax relief. And then secondly, coming out of COVID, right, wrong, or indifferent, there was an inordinate amount of money that was spent by the federal government, moving money into people's pockets as well as local and state government. And so those funds are reduced in this current budget. And so really the economy has continued to perform, again, not on that extreme scale that we've seen in some years, but at a more modest pace. So the economy has overall, state revenues have continued to increase because, again, the economy has continued to increase and grow in the state of Texas.
In the statement that you put out, I want to read this for the people. In the statement you put out, you said, not just, giving everybody the numbers, but you said thoughtful consideration of spending decisions. You're talking to the legislature here. Thoughtful consideration of spending decisions, as always, will be crucial to ensure new and existing investments can be funded in the future. And then these investments focus on improving the lives of Texans. Now, as I mentioned, you've not only been the comptroller for the last decade, but you were also a Texas legislator yourself. You were a member of the Senate. So tell us a little bit about what you think the pitfalls are of of a legislature that could potentially spend too much, or perhaps even not prioritize the right spending.
Oh, it can be enormous pitfalls. I mean, just look to the west of California, look to the east coast of the East Coast states where they create new programs when the economy is performing very well, and they don't really think about the future. They think about a short-term basis. Oh, this is a great idea. I mean, take California. Let's pick on California. We wouldn't be Texan if we didn't pick on California. That just 2 years ago, they had this record surplus, and now they have a budget deficit. And you have so many states that had surpluses a year ago, 2 years ago, and then now either they don't have surpluses and or they are deficits. And so therefore the point being is trying to do one-time expenditures on infrastructure needs in the state of Texas. We need to continue to build that, but not creating new programs just because, oh, today we have money. And that's the reason I continue to caution that this is not always going to last with this cash carryover balance. Whether you put money back into people's pockets, they can spend it better than government can. So those balances are extremely important, and not creating new government-funded programs that continue to last in perpetuity.
Do you ever miss being in the legislature?
Usually not on many days. Y'all asked earlier, is there a countdown? I don't have a countdown yet, but I am ready for them to wrap up session pretty quickly.
Just want to ask you one last thing, sir, about you've been very active within the Office of the Comptroller, specifically combating a lot of these, ESG policies, woke policies, as we call them, to really look after basically the money that's going into, pensions and whatnot. How do you see that practice going? When I say practice going, I mean the actual promulgation of these ESG programs. Do you see, as more states kind of turn away from that particular model, or going with services that have that particular model, do you see that unwinding, or are we going to just see it with a different coat of paint on it called something else, and it'll be back here in 2 years?
Yeah, I think what you see now is finally certain states, such as Texas and others, pushing back on this kind of wokeism, this agenda-driven. And what I've tried to do is have more of an intellectually honest conversation. Whether you drive, say if someone drives an electric vehicle, that's their prerogative. But the fact is, there's still 2,000 products on that vehicle that are made of a petroleum product. Whether it's the steering wheel, the seat they sit on, the tires, the door handle that they're closing, whether it's the coating of the wires, the batteries, for goodness sake, sit in a petroleum product. And so the point being is this whole falsehood that we're going to transition off the oil and gas industry is not realistic. Europe is seeing that. When we got partway through this responsibility of trying to figure out how we were going to identify those financial institutions that are quote unquote boycotting the oil and gas industry, I told my team, I said, oh my goodness, it's kind of the big lie. And they said, I'm sorry, what do you mean? Well, there was quite a few entities that may not have been boycotting the industry, but they sure gave the illusion that they were. In other words, their publications, the rhetoric, they said. Now, there were some that were boycotting. And so the point of it, red states are pushing back. I think you're going to continue to have that effort in certain states in the nation and around the world. But I think what we've been able to do is bring a more balanced discussion, a much more intellectually honest discussion, to show that connectivity of the industry to our daily lives. I mean, when you and I get up, two of the first things you touch is a toothbrush and a tube of toothpaste. And both are made of what? A petroleum product. And so the point is, it's surrounding in our lives, and we have to make sure that we're educated and honest. And I think you're seeing that pushback. And so entities are pulling back and actually now working towards investing as they should from a prudent, responsible investor standard and not a politically motivated agenda.
Excellent. Well, Comptroller Hegar, we know you're a busy man, especially this week. I mean, with session starting and putting out the revenue estimate and all of that. So we will let you get back to serving the people of Texas, and we deeply appreciate your time today. Thank you for being on the show.
Always good to be with you guys. Thanks a lot.
Well, that was great. That was great to hear from the comptroller. I know he's a like I said, he's a busy guy this week. And I'm sure he's fielding a lot of media interviews and a lot of questions about what this means for Texas and what we can spend and what we can't spend and what we shouldn't spend on that. What did you make of I mean, we covered a lot of different things. He talked about the resiliency of the Texas economy. You had the great question about BlackRock. I don't know if we saw this week. We didn't really promote this, but I saw that or not BlackRock, but the ESG issue. But that BlackRock, the largest investment company in the world, right, like 11 trillion in investments, announced that it was backing out of one of the world's biggest climate finance groups. It's called the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. But essentially did it as a result of folks like the comptroller pushing back on these ESG policies and saying, look, if you're going to try and attack the industries that are critical, the critical industries here in Texas that provide us with so much of our tax base, then you can't do business here. And so a lot of people think that BlackRock jumping out of this major investment group was a response to pushback like that.
Yeah, and I think, and we have, because I know, especially in certain sectors of the right, BlackRock has been, I'll say overly vilified, and rightfully so. But you have to understand, this isn't because they're part of, the whatever that UN cabal is for the asset managers. They respond to, almost first and foremost to financial incentive. They licked their finger, put it up in the wind, and said, "Oh, this ESG is the next thing. Let's go do that, because that way we can have a more attractive product for folks." Now, obviously, there's a lot of harms associated with that, which the comptroller had enumerated. But in doing so, it kind of put it down this path that actually, to your point, hurts Texas industries. And so them pulling out of that, I think, is a reflection to, again, the reaction from people like Comptroller Hegar from other conservative states. But I think it's more of is it a leading or a lagging indicator? I would say it's probably the latter, simply because the winds have shifted and we're blowing that way now. And that's also I wanted to ask him about is this brand of activism, is this something that, is starting to be on the decline, or is this something we're going to see with a fresh coat of paint here in 2 years? And the good thing is, I'm more hopeful that it's the former, but I think that we're going to see, people still try and use the boardroom as ways of getting their particular policy agenda across, and we just have to be vigilant to make sure that it doesn't, reemerge in a way that would also harm, Texas pensioners, and specifically in this case.
I hear the governor talk about how he's got the greatest job in America, although, and he very well might. But I mean, if you look at it, being the guy that gets to, count the beans, so to speak, in Texas, in a place like Texas, which routinely, again, go back to all the various statistics and data that you look at, is an incredibly resilient state. I mean, we're almost, I don't put this out there, because it's going to happen, but we're basically recession proof. I mean, regardless of the last 4 years and all of the issues with inflation and how it's really, hurt the economy in a lot of areas, Texas does pretty well. And it's, it's good fiscal policy. It's responsible fiscal management. And maybe Comptroller Hegar has the best job in the world, because he gets to sit on top of all of that, on all of that success. We have a $24 billion surplus this year, it's $24 billion surplus.
If our surplus was a state, it would be in the upper half.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I looked at, similarly situated states. I mean, we look at New York and California. I mean, California's got a $2 billion deficit this year. I mean, he's got to have one of the best jobs in the country, because we're a great state. We have good fiscal policy. We make the right decisions, and we expect our lawmakers to be responsible and do the right thing.
And to be fair, and I think he would be the first to hasten to add, because when you asked him about the question about the how much. Basically how you opened with this, admonition about, fiscal restraint. To be fair, now obviously there's always some new shiny thing that people want to spend money on. There's also things that are expensive that people need to spend money on that is important to do the right way. I'm thinking of water just for one of these things, because you can't have tiny micro water infrastructure projects. But that being said, is the lawmakers have, to a large extent, and at the very least, more so than their peers in other states, have basically approached the process of budget making with an eye towards, not getting out over their skis. Appropriations Chairman Bonin, talks about how we actually paid down some of our pre-existing pension liability. You talk about states like California where they have an upfront $2 billion deficit. How much an unfunded pension liability are they sitting on? That is a powder keg just waiting for a match to strike. Meanwhile, not only did we change our system, we're paying down the liability on the system that we already have, or that we had. And so ours, we're looking good for the future. Obviously, shocks can happen. Shocks will happen, I should say. But I would much rather be in a state like Texas that is most largely in control of its self-determination than a state like California.
And I'll give them a lot of credit because I talked to a freshman member last year about halfway through the session, and he just in a moment of quiet reflection, he just said, he wasn't ready for the number of people that come in the office every day and all they do is ask for money. Mm-hmm. And he listed off 15 different, and just it was the nurses and the doctors and the construction, and it was just all these industries and everything. It was just literally every day, meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And he said, one, it kind of wears you down, and part of it is because a lot of them have a legitimate case to be made that they're not, that they do need, in fact, that some industry needs help or needs more funding. I mean, you're up there way more than I am. I mean, you spent half your life, if you're in public policy, up there at the legislature. I mean, what's it like up there for those guys to take all of these meetings and person after person after group asking for all this money, then to go out, and I give them a lot of credit then, to go out and create a budget that is in fact fiscally responsible.
Well, to be honest with you, especially this time of session and peaking around April, if you actually get to face-to-face time with the member, that you're already on second base leading off. Mm-hmm. But to be honest with you, and that's why we here at TPPF have really experienced success by not necessarily advocating for things with price tags. Now, look, I mean, obviously, there are certain public interest spending that does need to be done. I mentioned water earlier.
The border.
It's just to say nothing about the border. But all that to say is, as far as an industry is concerned, I mean, this is actually the process. A lot of people say, oh, it's gross, it's yucky. And it's like, I'd rather have a place where we could petition our legislators, even if it's for gross and yucky things, and they have to tell us no, than one where we don't have access, which is, actually in many countries I have that. That's more, grand level stuff. Now, when you go to an office and you have something that might have a fiscal note on it, oftentimes that could be seen as the death knell. Oftentimes they're like, ooh, this says, I'm basically going to have to account for an additional, even if something small like $10 million. And how crazy it is that we're saying $10 million is small. But even if it's something that relatively de minimis in the course of the larger budget, lawmakers are very bristly about having to go and defend a $10 million hole that they have now. And that's, again, that's I think it sees a feature, not a bug, because people now know that, unless you can really make a compelling case, then it's probably DOA. Now, I will say, some of the trade associations tend to be a little more, and this isn't insulting them or talking out of school or anything, but they tend to be more transactional in that way. They're saying, sir, the forklift drivers and associated lunch ladies pack, gave your campaign, contributed.
Very powerful pack.
Yeah, exactly. We can't let the lunch ladies unionize. But that being said, they might say, look, we were very supportive of you. We would like to see some movement in this direction. And even if it's something I'm not saying it's pay to play, but even if it's something that individual agrees with, oh yeah, I can see the merits of that. And that gets the conversation going. Now, the problem is the forklift drivers and associated lunch ladies now have to go ahead and convince an additional 180 people. We'll just say back 181, so 182 total, if you include the lieutenant governor in there as well, of the reason that, we need better forklifts and lunch trays.
Absolutely. All right. Okay. So that's we'll close on that. It was a great discussion. We're super excited to have Comptroller Hegar with us. But let's get into our 10-minute drill and our various segments. The first segment is we like to talk about polling. I'm a big fan of polling, so we'll jump into our Survey Says segment. I saw this was pretty interesting. Gallup has a new poll, or a recent poll out, asking people whether or not the country has made progress or lost ground on a particular issue from the Biden presidency. So during the Biden presidency, did it lose ground or did it make progress on a particular issue? I think it was like 15 different issues. 14 of the 15 issues, the American people said that we had lost ground. And we're talking about, like, on taxes, it was like minus 56 points. On energy was like minus 22 points. So every single major issue during the Biden administration, we have lost ground. Add to that, Biden's approval rating, if you can call it that, is now at 39%. And then you juxtapose all of that and the discontent of the American people against the speech that he gave this week, which was sort of his mission accomplished speech, that he had met and surpassed the various promises that he made to America. What do you make of all this? Where is the American people just black-pilled and they just think that everything is going to hell in a handbasket?
No, because there actually is one domain. So to recapitulate the findings from the Gallup poll, we've lost ground across everything. There's not one. There's only one, I should say.
So not just the major issues, but literally everything.
Oh, and that was situation for gay, lesbian, and transgender people is a net of improvement of 16%.
So there was the one that was improvement was LGBT rights. We've improved.
But like some of the stuff, the juxtaposition is just mind-boggling. Remember when we had all the talk about the Green New Deal and the Inflation Reduction Act, which they said, oh, it's an economic program, and it was all just more green, worthless spending in disguise.
Yeah, greenwashing.
So would you not think that we would enjoy some ancillary benefit from that? We've lost four points on climate change after going 56 point down on the federal debt. So it's
it basically passes the Green New Deal and the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, and yet even with that, with the trillions in spending and all the attention being paid to that, the American people think that even on the issue of climate change and environment and all of that, we've still lost ground according to the American people.
I don't know how you square those results with I thought when Mayor Pete built those 8 car chargers that would mean that we would basically be in the sunlit uplands where everything's powered by unicorn detritus and sunshine, but that's not where we're at.
Nice spin there.
I would say until we get Jefferson a dump switch, I have to watch myself.
You have to monitor your speech. Hey, this is a family show. We don't have to get into the locker room humor. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, look, this goes back to our closing show in 2024. My New Year's resolution was to believe the American people when they tell you the same thing over and over again. Mm-hmm. And here's more evidence of that. Literally every single issue during the Biden administration. And this goes to maybe another question. Again, we don't pundit a lot on this show, but I mean, this could be the Biden 4 years could be the worst presidency in modern America. I mean, maybe not ever American. I'm sure you can think of several others that were pretty bad. But modern American history, this is worse than the Carter administration.
Right? No, absolutely. And rest in peace to the former president. But so as not to speak ill of the dead, we don't need to really parse out or the recently dead. We don't need to parse out his record, but I think we can widely say that, unless you were, basically Iran, you probably were moving backwards, much like this poll indicates here. But again, we can put that for another time. I would have to say that if you take everything in totality, not just the policy, but just the general gaslighting of the American people, you take everything in a totality with the military bleed. And here's the thing, everyone wants to talk about our military spending. Not only is it a fairly small percentage of our federal spending, which is out of control and reckless to begin with. With all the inflation that the Biden administration has introduced into the system, in real dollars, we actually are having military budget cuts, right? So we actually have less readiness abroad. He came in, the adults are in the room nonsense, first thing, pulls out of Afghanistan in such a slipshod way, and then just tanks in his approval rating, and has really never recovered. Has
wrecks the border. I mean, like the first 4 things he did were like reverse the Trump era policies that were keeping the border safe.
And nowadays we're seeing him. He goes out there and managed to muster a somewhat coherent speech, and he's talking about like tech oligarchs. Like, bro, the guys who gave to your campaign, those guys.
Yeah.
And it's like I have no time for this guy. Hopefully he's going to do his little Roomba routine off into the sunset.
In preparation for this segment, I went back. I mean, I read this speech. I mean, I watched it and was just kind of shaking my head the whole time. But like, I went back and read, for comprehension this time. I was looking for the argument that he had a successful administration.
It was on what was on the teleprompter. It wasn't what was said, right? Because I assume that'd be a lot more difficult for you.
It was. I mean, yeah, it was what was written at least, or as we say in comms, prepared for delivery, regardless of what was actually said. But it was, I mean, you skipping down through all the rhetoric and all and then it dives into all of these attacks like you're talking about and going after the tech oligarchs and basically attacking Trump. Some farewell speech. I mean, it was, anyway, I think it may be too early to tell at this moment, but in the not too distant future, I think it will be pretty obvious that this probably was the worst administration in recent political history.
And to quote Key and Peele, he can go.
He can go. All right. Segment number 2, lies, damn lies, and statistics. TPPF put out a new report. Again, more shameless plugging from us, but I think this is a really, really interesting and frankly, it's an issue that sparks a lot of reaction. Is this issue of squatters in Texas? And you might laugh and think it's funny, but the reality is, from what we can tell, you would think in a state like Texas, which has a very strong cultural reverence for property rights, that you would think in a state like Texas that rules against people just literally coming in and stealing your property or claiming your home as their own. You would think that that's not a thing, that couldn't happen in Texas, and yet it is, and it does, and we really need to have a sense of urgency about fixing it. What does the research say, Derek?
Well, I recall when we had Chance Weldon on here talking about this specifically, because obviously I think that we can all, you and I can agree that when it comes to someone who upholds property rights, Chance Weldon is probably like almost like a cartoon character in that regard. But
he is Attila the Hun when it comes to property rights, if I can use that analogy.
That analogy doesn't work because what Attila used to do to the property that he did.
Genghis Khan? I don't know.
I think we're getting
not going Hitler, right? So we're not allowed to use that analogy. So.
But he's obviously a very, very big proponent of property rights. And what we see with the squatters issue is something that just cuts, much as you said, right to the core of the average Texan, because, it's your home is your castle. This is where, you have either are renting the right or have bought the right to live in peace within your house. And for somebody who, has no stake in the program, has never, paid any paid a dime to that, it is just so fundamentally anathema to what we believe as Texans. Now, the issue is, and this is something, not to redo the entire show that we did with Chance, but the issue lies within the ambiguities of eviction law and things like that. And what, because it is wrongly interpreted that sometimes squatters are treated as tenants, which nothing can be further from the truth, which luckily we have seen some bills filed already that really clarify that if you cannot demonstrate your interest in the property, then not only will you be removed, but you'll be hit with a trespassing charge as well. And if you deliver false information to the officers, magistrates, whomever is dealing with the, basically parsing that out, then you're in for some big boy jail time.
Yeah, that to me was the most insane part of this about realizing kind of where we are on this issue, is that squatters because of the like you said, the ambiguity in Texas law, are treated as tenants. Like someone can like overcome your property, and that and I'll just read from our paper here because I want to set this up for you and get your reaction. The only method currently available to Texas property owners to remove a squatter requires a property owner to go through the eviction process. I mean, this is somebody who is trespassing on your land. You would think you could just call a cop and say, "Hey, this person's on my property. Get them off." That's not the case. You have to treat them as a tenant almost, and go through the eviction process. And this is very quickly. I'll try to get through this quickly. This is what you have to do. You have to send a formal eviction notice, as per Texas eviction laws. In Texas, the default notice is a 3-day notice to quit, but landlords can enforce a shorter or longer notice period if it is specified on the lease agreement. Again, there's no lease agreement here, so it takes at least 3 days. So you have to post. You have to go to your own property and post that you're evicting somebody. After the notice period has expired, the 3 days, the owner must then file a complaint of forcible detainer with the Texas Justice of the Peace Court. So you have to go to a court. Anyway, there's 3 or 4 more steps. I'm not going to get through this quickly because the point here is that this is actually a very laborious process to get through. But the bottom line is, if the squatter does not move out within 24 hours after the final writ is served, then at that point, after a week or so, the sheriff could then show up and forcibly remove the squatter. This is absurd. We need to fix this tomorrow.
Well, and yes, and yes, and I'll say to that. But it's going to be funny because I mean, you've been here long enough. You've been a student of the legislature, or at least the communications around it. For you, that we're up in the building. You are more like, look, people holding your eyes open, a la Clockwork Orange to make you watch it. But you know exactly how this debate's going to go, right? It's going to be people. Hey, here's a bill on prohibiting squatters, and people in the back, Michael will be like, oh, well, the affordability issue that we caused. These people have nowhere else to go, despite all the homeless spending. All these different things are going to be such old and tired tropes going to be trotted out against this. Is just more emblematic of the fact that the current playbook used by one side of this debate, or one side of policy ideology to begin with, is no longer sufficient for communicating to the American people, because they're going to have to say, hey, there is somebody in my house and I can't get them out, and I can't have my kids live in there while they're there. And like, oh, but have you thought of affordability? Have you thought of, the fact that we only spend several $100 million a year on homelessness? It's all this other stuff where nobody wants to talk about the actual problem, and that you have a very dangerous person, or a potentially dangerous person in a very dangerous situation going on property that is not even theirs.
One of the examples we use in the paper to make even matters worse is the example of someone who's actually organizing, using apps and the internet and chat rooms and things like that to organize illegal aliens coming over here and exploiting our lack of squatter rules, which essentially says, once you get over here, go find a house that's not being occupied, and you would have at least a week or two to be able to stay in someone's house once you get over here illegally.
That sounds. I know. What do I know about the law, right? But that sounds to me an awful lot like a conspiracy to commit fraud. A conspiracy to basically deprive people of property rights, and that is a punishable offense.
But is part of the issue, I'm glad you set that up for me on this last point, is part of the problem that squatting is not a criminal offense, and that's why, if you call the cops, they can't do anything when they get there because it's not technically a criminal offense, and you've got to go through all these sort of civil steps in order to evict someone from your property.
So squatting is not a criminal offense. What you usually do is, if it is enforced, or if there is something like this and a person's not leaving, they usually hit them with a trespass, right? Which is usually about a Class B misdemeanor. And the problem is, a Class B misdemeanor, probably 9 times out of 10 is not going to come with jail time, right? So even if somebody's doing this and getting pulled out, going to a different house, getting pulled out, it's one of these things where we need to make it very clear within state statute, and not in a way that, we'll say differently oriented prosecutors, and you can read into who that is,
The Soros guys, is that what you're talking about? I'll just say you don't have to.
He won the Presidential Medal of something the other day. I will have put some respect on his name. Yeah, and then so did I think Messi as well. So, by the way, is that just like now? Like, wouldn't it be cool if I talked to this guy? And so let's give him an award.
You're the president. You can just call somebody up and talk to him. You don't have to give him a presidential award in order to hang out with him.
I will say for Messi though, he scored an awful lot of goals, but neither here nor there. But speaking of squatting, but that being said, if they're not going to enforce it, if they have these prosecutors aren't going to enforce it, then we're going to have a problem still. But that's where you start getting some of the ideas like rogue DAs and some of the reforms in that camp. But if you make it in a way where it's you can't prosecutorial discretion your way out of actually doing your job, then this would be something that I think would be sending that message.
This is one of those issues where, to your point, it's somebody's on your property, they're trespassing. A lot of times it's a house that's been abandoned, or, it says, grandma passed away, we haven't done something with the house or whatever. So you're, in that sense, it's not a violent, offense.
At this point.
But it's funny when we write about this, or when we, post on social media about it, or when we release the paper, there is this visceral reaction from Texans, because it does connect to this issue of property rights, which is so foundational among Texans. This idea that this is my property and I have ultimate rights over this domain. That's just something about, I think it may be different in Texas than it is in maybe other states, the way we think about it. So it's just funny. You're right. It's not a violent offense. It's not something that people tear their hair out. Except that when it happens, it's just so outrageous that the law or that the laws on our books don't better protect property owners from this kind of thing happening.
I don't even know if I'd go as far as say it's a nonviolent offense, much like we have the difference between burglary and aggravated robberies, whether a person's home or not. You know what I mean? And those are radically different charges. But, with this, I mean, what happens, you have somebody forcing themselves into your house. That's one of the ones where obviously, criminologically speaking, we can debate where you put the demarcation line between violent and nonviolent offense. Right. Because as Nikki pointed out the other day, arson is considered a nonviolent offense.
Right.
Again, because nobody's home. But that being said, is regardless of that, this, like I said, a strong bill in this domain will actually show that this sort of behavior is not at all acceptable.
All right. Well, hopefully we've talked about enough different and variety of issues to set the stage for the 89th legislative session, which began this week. We are in full swing. TVPF is in full swing. In fact, I'm just doing meetings right before this podcast, and as soon as we leave here, we're going to be doing more meetings and talking about pushing all kinds of different legislative agendas and priorities this year. So the only segment left is what's next. What are we looking at? What are we watching for in the next week or so?
Well, so obviously the speaker's race has been put to bed.
What was that? I missed.
It's some minor housekeeping thing they have to do in the house. All right. I was about to say, you see, a more astute person seeing that coming down the pipe like myself could have made a squatter's joke on that house. But I'm gonna give the listeners the raw materials and let's let them do it themselves.
You're gonna keep your job for another week, isn't it?
No, not. But that be everything being said is. My biggest thing is Speaker Burrows is going to constitute his committees, and I think that's really going to show. What I say, like everyone thinks, obviously we say personnel is policy, and people extrapolate that out to mean that like certain chairmanships mean he thinks X about this or Y about that, and truth be told, like that's never been true. I mean, there's definitely people with their priors that go in that. But I mean, even, very strong chairman, can't really stand in front of the will of the chamber. That being said, that's what I'm looking forward to, or I'm looking for. Also, we should probably see the first raw, uncut, rough draft of the budget here probably in the next couple of weeks. Really like to see where that particular document is, because that in and of itself, obviously the House is going to have one version, the Senate's going to have another, but still they're probably going to be fairly, at the very least, adjacent to each other, right? And so that's going to signal the legislature as a whole where their priorities are. Are those going to align with the governors? Are they going to align with kind of the, some of the more potent business interests that we see? We talked about, the Senate today has already created their committees and already staffed them. And we saw that the lieutenant governor now has a standalone economic development committee. Now, does this mean that we're going to have an entire portfolio of economic development things? Actually, it's probably because natural resources is, the thing it was joined with is its own monster. They're going to have to deal with the water bill, just to say the least. But that being said, we're starting to see what this session is going to look like take shape. And that's what I think I would really like to see next. But to that point, what specific thing? And that would be the population of the committees over in the House.
We will be watching for that. Committee chairman, obviously those will be announced here in the next few weeks or so. And that's going to be very important as well. For me, it's the call. It's the emergency items from the governor. There's in that first 60 days, you can't do any real legislative business. Another one of the quirks, the features, not a bug, of our legislative system here in Texas. It's a lot of hurry up and wait. We start the session and then we can't do anything for 60 days. At least can't pass any bills for 60 days unless it is an emergency item from the governor. That's called the call. He usually waits until he gives his state of the state address. That's at least what happened last time. It was kind of mid-February, but a lot of people are thinking, hey, let's get a head start on things like, school choice. It was one of the big issues that everybody ran and won on last time. So maybe we give that an early start. So we're interested in seeing when that happens. And it truly is. I mean, all the intel that we get, and I'm sure that our listeners get, the reality is nobody really knows when that's going to happen. And so we're all going to be watching with bated breath.
I think there's definitely some items that, probably stand better than even odds of being included as an emergency item. Just from the speeches that he's given recently, most recently on Tuesday in front of the Senate, enumerating what he wants to do. And again, first and foremost, to surprise no one, also to satisfy our contractual obligation, school choice. But also...
Almost made it.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm pretty sure you get fired if we don't, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's obviously a big one. He's mentioned a lot more recently with bail and our border, and then bail as well. And bail, obviously we've passed SB 6, that obviously made it a little more difficult for violent offenders. But the problem is, and I'll beat this horse till the cows come home. That's two mixed metaphors, barnyard theme there.
On the football field, you want to throw a sports metaphor?
Yeah, exactly. But the problem is that Texas is one of a few states that does not have preventative detention. And almost, I didn't say almost every other, but in many, many, many other states, if somebody is incredibly dangerous and in front of a judge, that judge can go, there's no amount of bail that's going to not make you dangerous. The officer that was killed on, what was it, Monday or Tuesday? The officer was killed by a guy who was out on a third-degree felony bond forfeiture. So he'd already been bail jumping, and yet we just engage in this process of insanity because we do not give our magistrates the ability to say, you know what? End of the line for you, pal. You're gonna be a guest until we adjudicate this case.
This is something that you've worked on in a previous life for a decade or so.
You see the gray?
Yeah.
You see the gray?
Yeah, we could do a whole show on criminal justice reform with Derek for sure. But that is our time. Jefferson's giving me the high sign saying we got to get out of here because those are the rules of podcasts, I guess. Unless you're Joe Rogan, you can't do more than an hour. So anyway, there's lots more to talk about. That's why we're going to go weekly with our show again during session. So we will save all of that kind of talk for the next show. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And as always, I messed this up. And as always, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.